Alright, so in this first part, tutorial series, we're going to be doing a bit of a bowling alley scene. We're going to start by modeling the pins. It's going to be a pretty quick exercise to get you guys familiar with the setup. First, though, I want to configure some of my settings in Maya itself before we get started. Mainly my UI and my workspace. So I like working in the modeling standard workspace. It's just gonna give me the bare bone tools I need and the settings and everything. Right now we really don't have to worry a lot about the buttons up here. That really doesn't matter for now. Though I do want to add some extra windows to work with. So I'm gonna open up my channel block, my outliner, sorry. And my outliner is essentially my layers, or my equivalent to layers in Photoshop, where I can view basically any physical object or light that I have in my scene. They're gonna show up here where I can directly select them, not have to select them in the viewport. Right, I can name them, delete them all through my outliner. That's always good to have. This right here, if you've never seen it before, this is our 3D workspace or 3D viewport. 90% of the work that we're going to be doing in this course is going to take place in the viewport itself, right? Basically, any object that has a physical equivalent, lights, objects, they're all going to be represented in 3D in this scene. And lastly, I like to have my outliner open, which you can find up here. Show hide channel box. Right there. And I like to have it right next to my attribute right here. I'm just gonna get that out there. There we go. So you really should only have to do this once. Once you save a scene, everything should stay relatively the same. If you want to have a custom workspace, you could also save it by going into your workspace and then save current workspace as. If for some reason something's missing or not working like you intended, you could also reset your workspace right here, and that resets it to its default settings. So with that out of the way, let's actually start talking about how do we actually start moving in a scene first. But before that, I want to create an object to actually like look around and manipulate it as I'm working. So the first thing I'm going to do is by going up here in poly modeling, I'm going to click on a cylinder just to add that. And to zoom in and out of it, I'm using my scroll wheel, but I kind of want to focus on it. Right now, it's just kind of going above it. If you want to focus on your object as you're working on it, you can press F to focus or frame the object. And if I want to move around it, I want to orbit my camera around it, I can hold Alt and then my left click. And that allows me to rotate my camera, look around my object. Right now we are in a perspective view, which means it's behaving like a real world camera, right? It has depth. If I want to zoom in and out again, just scroll wheel, or if you hold Alt and right click, you can zoom in and out this way. If I want to move my camera left and right, up and down, I can hold Alt and the middle mouse, and that allows me to move my camera left, right, up and down, however I need to. If in any event, I kind of lose sight of my object, which tends to happen, what you could do is press F with the object selected. And as you can see, this is why I like having the outliner on. It shows me what object I have selected, and I can move it around. Right, so that's basic navigation, more or less. If I want to actually start manipulating my object, all I have to do is remember a couple shortcuts, mainly Q, W, E, and R. Right, these keys, as you can see, change my selection on my upper left corner. Right. If I just want to select an object, you press Q. That allows you, if you have multiple objects on your scene, you can select them individually. If you click and drag, you can select multiple objects. And if you hold Shift and click, that also adds to your selection. If you want to deselect objects, you hold Control. Notice how I have a little minus sign that deselects them, right? And vice versa. If you hold Shift, that adds to your selection. If you want to delete an object, you select it. You can press Backspace or Delete to get rid of it. And how to actually move it? Well, by pressing W. W is transpose, and that lets you move the object up, down, left, right, all over your scene. If you wanted to rotate your object, you press E, and that allows for rotation. Same deal, right, up, down, left, and right. And then lastly, if I want to change its size, I can press R. And by clicking on the center square, I can make it big around the whole shape of the object, or I can scale it in specific areas to sort of squish it into shape as I'm working, right? So the basic, this is essentially what we're going to be doing, like also like maybe 80-90% of the time, just doing some configuration of moving, scaling, and rotating our objects. So with that out of the way, let's just really quick start our bowling pin, right? So to begin, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my panels, and I'm going to look for an orthographic camera. Now, the difference between a perspective and an orthographic camera is that an orthographic camera, it's essentially locked to one specific view. Think of it as a 2D camera. So if I go to my orthographic front, I can only see the front of the object. And this is really important because the image I'm going to be importing, I need to have this camera set up first so that I can import it on that specific view so that later I could keep working. So to import an image, right, you can download it off Google. You're going to have access to it on the classroom later on when the assignment's available. You can click over here on image plane and then go over to your downloads or wherever you store your image. And it should, in this case, it did not import. Let me see real quick here if it actually downloaded. Or where it's being stored. I think it's not being stored in my downloads. Okay, let me just, there we go. Just move that over to my downloads folder, see if that worked. Here it is. Right, obviously this isn't the most efficient way to do it. You would have it as a separate folder, but I just moved it around. In that case, you just press open, and your image is gonna show up right smack in the center of your scene. As you can see, the pin is not right smack in the center. So with W, I'm gonna move this a little bit to the right. We're just trying to follow that same center line. Again, since we're gonna be modeling the pin ourselves, we don't have to worry too much about symmetry. It's gonna be pretty straightforward. But just in case, right, just make sure it's more or less in the center. And if I don't wanna move this or select this accidentally, I can head on over to my channel box / layer editor, right, or turn this on over here. And then go to layers and then create a layer from selected and then press this blank square twice to turn it into a reference. Now I can't touch or move this object by accident if I were to select it. So now that we have our reference, let's add, basically the way you can think of an object is by first picking a primitive that's already pretty close to its original shape. So in this case, a cylinder is, right, our closest shape to start with, and we're actually going to start molding this bit by bit as we're working. So first I want to reduce the amount of polygons that I have on my scene first, and a quick introduction as to what a polygon is. Essentially, all models that we will be working in this class will be mainly focused on polygon modeling specifically. So these models are made, well, out of polygons. And polygons are created based on 3 major components. You have your vertices, which are these points. These points, when you have 2 or more, connect to form edges. And 3 or more edges create faces. So what we'll be actually modeling overall, we'll just be shifting these components around to kind of get the shape that we need. We'll be extruding, we'll be deleting, adding, bridging, cutting, in order to generate the shape that we need. Right? Basically, a cylindrical shape like a pin is a pretty beginner-friendly shape to start with because basically already most of the work is done. Now it's just a matter of actually creating our shape. So the first thing I'm going to do, now that I have my reference up, and right now I'm in a perspective view, and I might have not explained how I actually shifted between my views, but if you go over here to panels, you can change between them, panels and then perspective. Or if you hold spacebar, click on Maya, you have perspective, you have front, you just hold your mouse over which view you want and then you let go of the button and that shifts your views, right? So the first thing I'm gonna do is delete these faces first. I don't have to, but it's just gonna make things a bit easier as I'm working. So I'm gonna hold right click this time, select face. Or if you go over to your modeling toolkit, which is why we're using the modeling standard workspace, you can select these components from here. You can go, oh, I want to go object mode, or I want to go vertex, or I want to go edge, or I want to go face. You can select those individually, right? So I'm going to delete this entire cap right here. Same with the bottom one. If you hold tab, this allows for drag selection. And then you can just go up over here. And then with Alt and left click, I rotate the camera, delete all these, do the same over here. Just drag select. And we deleted this caps, right? This is just gonna make it easier for me to extrude my edges later on. So I'm gonna go back to my front view, right? Spacebar, front. And then I'm gonna press this box over here, which is my X-ray view. Now I'm gonna be able to actually see my reference. So the first thing I'm gonna do is that in object mode, I'm gonna try to match, basically pick an area that is around the same size as the object to kind of give me that starting point. And I can maybe scale this down a little bit. Notice that the reference might not be 100% symmetrical. What I recommend you do, instead of moving the object outside of the line of symmetry, line up the reference instead. You wanna keep your objects in the center, because if you don't, you risk the chance of basically damaging your symmetry later on if you want to do symmetrical operations like mirroring later on. So in this case, I'm just going to turn this off and then maybe move this to the side, and again just try to maybe match it more or less in the center. There we go. And reference again, and then here we go. Right, so next up, I'm going to hold right click, go to edge, and then double click to select this entire ring of edges right here. Lower this down a little bit, and then scale. Always remember to scale from the light blue square, because if you do it from like this angle or this angle, right, this kind of looks like it's working, but if you go back to perspective, you're essentially creating an oval shape, so you're breaking your reference. You always do it from the center, so that you preserve the circular shape of your cylinder, right? Just a heads up, since we'll be mainly working from the front perspective, it's really easy to think that the model is behaving how you want it to, and then you look at perspective and everything's broken. So if you want to be like really careful, you could have multiple views up. I personally don't like to have it that way because it kind of distracts me. It's a bit too cluttered. But if you go over here, this is your panel layout view, and you can click here to have multiple views at the same time, or you could have two views at the same time. Like right here, I can have my perspective and my front view on, right? This is honestly a personal preference, however you guys like to have your setup. So for now, I'm gonna keep this, and you also have to turn on the X-ray individually per different panel, right? So I could turn this on here and then turn this off over here to kind of view the final result and how it's going right now. And the way you can extrude, and extruding is essentially you're adding more faces to your topology, right? So you can press Control E, and that's extrude, right? Poly extrude edge, and then you can go up, and then we shift with R to scale, and then we shift, then we can press Control E once again. So this method, the problem with it is that it's going to keep basically slanting our, notice how every time I press Control E, now it's kind of like an angle, and it works in this scenario where I kind of want to keep going in this direction, but there's going to come a point, especially when I reach over here, where I want to do it on the opposite direction. So the way I prefer to do it, instead of continually pressing Control E and extruding bit by bit, what I tend to do is I will either shift to my move by pressing W and then using E to scale. And something else you can do, instead of pressing Control E to extrude bit by bit, if you hold down Shift, you'll see that it says extrude, and then you can keep going up and then press R to scale, and then E once again. And I'm gonna pick this side for my symmetry. Notice how it's still not perfectly symmetrical. One of the reasons this might be the case is that the camera of the image, reference image, isn't 100% orthographic. There might be a bit of tilt in the perspective. So, right, keep that in mind. But in any case, right, this is more or less, I'm not gonna try to do this one-to-one. I'm just using this as a base for my reference. And I'm mainly gonna be sticking to this side, if anything, right? It'll still be completely symmetrical later on. Right, and I'm pressing Shift, right? When it says extrude, you can move up and you're creating new topology. If you don't press Shift, you're just moving the edge up and down. That's really all you're doing. And then hold, and then do the same over here. And then bit by bit. Hold E. And then I'm gonna leave this like this for now. I'm gonna come back to this later on. I'm gonna do the same near the bottom. So we extrude. Something I also tend to do is that I'll go for the extreme, right? You don't have to go like this super meticulous going, right, bit by bit. You can kind of shortcut a little, because later on we can smooth our topology, which is gonna make it's gonna take care of a lot of that guesswork for us. So instead of going like that, I can just maybe pick the most extreme point and then scale that down. And if for some reason maybe the edge isn't lining up perfectly, I could use this tool over here that's called the multi-cut. Hold Control and then add additional lines in my topology. For example, here I'm missing, right, this curvature over here, and I needed this extra edge to do so. So now that I had created it, I can double click and then scale and then match it, right? And then maybe do the same over here. Right now this is more or less fine tweaking, which, you know, you can spend hours doing that. But now that I have this set up, once again, this curvature that you guys see here, this has to do more with the perspective of the object. You definitely want to keep this line straight though, because you want to keep the surface flat for our pin, right? So now that that's done, essentially now we have this pin shape going on here, right? Pretty easy, but as you guys saw, it involves a lot of tools to get to this point. I'm gonna close these caps now, and a quick way to do this is just by double clicking the edge, and then you're gonna extrude by pressing Control E. Right, in this case I do recommend you guys use Control E instead of using Shift, and then you can scale it. And careful, don't do this, right? This doesn't actually close the bottom, and it's very important to keep your topology watertight whenever you can, especially since you would be adding extra vertices that really don't do anything. In this case, I'm just gonna essentially just weld this area shut, and the way to do this is by, again, I have this area selected, and I can go over to Edit Mesh and then merge the center, right? And that closes that area up. Same with the top. You can double click, extrude, and you don't have to move it. If you just extrude and this shows up, you can just straight up go Edit Mesh and then merge the center, and then maybe move this little point up, and I can basically turn the visibility of my reference. By the way, if you press V, that's the visibility, and that's more or less my pin, right? Now there's some things, some areas that we can maybe refine a little bit more. Maybe add an extra support edge right here. The way I did this is by holding down Control, right click, Edge Ring Utilities to Edge Ring and Split, or use the multi-cut, Control, and then click right down the middle. Right. This area looks a little bit wonky, so now it's a matter of like maybe doing some editing on the fly here. See how it's looking. And I'm gonna do a soft selection, not soft selection, sorry, a soften edge operation on this here pin. As you can see, this area looks really smooth, and this area is looking kind of low poly. That's just how Maya's rendering our polygons in the scene. So to fix that, we can go over to surface, not surface, sorry, mesh display, and then soften edge. Right, if it's still looking a bit too low poly, right, you can kind of see some jank here. It's kind of looking like a PS1, PS2 pin, right? We could smooth it by going into, oh, before that actually, before I actually smooth this pin, notice that if I were to smooth it, I'm going to lose a lot of my resolution right here at the bottom, right? And I want to keep this line straight. So what I'm going to do, again, I'm just going to select this here edge by double clicking on it. And I'm going to press Control B or bevel, and you can find that also in your modeling toolkit. The tool is right here. You press bevel. I like to decrease the fraction. If you hold Control, it gives you, well, greater control over this here value. I usually lower it to like maybe 0.1, 0.5, around that area. And add an additional segment, which is a cut that's also right here at the bottom. And then when I try to smooth preview, this is the result I get, right? So I'm actually going to smooth this object proper by going into mesh and then pressing smooth. Right, and there we go. And this is essentially the pin. We can clean up some of this topology later on. It's actually pretty easy. I'm just going to select these faces like we did at the beginning, and then go to edit mesh and then merge to center, and then do the same thing up top here. Select all these faces, edit mesh, merge to center. And then maybe move this up a little bit just to keep that roundness on top. Right, so here's our pin. And one last thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move this up above the floor. If we go to our front view, right, spacebar front, just try to kind of eyeball it right smack in the middle right there. Just that it's touching that line right here. This is gonna be very relevant for other exercises that we're gonna be doing. Lastly, what we're gonna be doing to finish this up is press freeze transform, which is this button right here, and delete history. This is gonna basically, it's not gonna delete the undo history, but it's gonna clean up basically the construction history of the object, which is literally everything we did in this exercise. I kind of want to have a clean slate for later on when we enter what's the UV mapping phase and all that other good stuff. All right.